Let me tell you something.
It's been a tough year, y'all. Okay.
Pause.
We are.
I cannot talk right now.
And at the top of each podcast.
And,
Okay.
And, yeah.
I can't talk.
Take two. Okay. Hey, this is Vanessa Becker-Weig.
And this is Ellie Clark.
We're super excited to share our guest with you today. We're going to take a little bit of time, though, and just catch up on some craziness going on here in Kentucky after a horrible weekend of tornadoes. I was actually out of town. I wasn't here when it all happened. I just started getting all of these messages from people asking if I was okay. And I was kind of checked out for a bit. Didn't have any idea that it had gone on.
Yeah. Evan and I had checked the weather here in Georgia, and it was 48 degrees in the morning. And then the evening, like at midnight, was 66 degrees. And we're like, what a strange up in temperature into the evening. And then I woke up the next morning to, like you, a lot of messages and devastating pictures and, trying to figure out where it hit. And then immediately thinking of all my Governor's School for the Arts kiddos spread out around Kentucky. It hit Western Kentucky, 7 tornadoes, I think. A lot of people have more information than us, but we definitely want to encourage and say, if you don't know what to do, but you want to help, we would love to give you some places where you can donate if you've struggled finding them, or we just want to make it easy for everyone.
From what I understand, blood donations are the most important at this point. And you can go to the WKY Red Cross, and 100% of those donations can go towards that tornado relief.
And I think there's 60 different GoFundMes happening right now. If you search GoFundMe for Western Kentucky tornado relief, there's a lot of accounts that you can give to. And then the Kentucky.gov, what is that, Vanessa?
Yes, Kentucky.gov. It's the Western Kentucky Tornado Relief Team. So you can go directly to Kentucky.gov, and all of those proceeds will get to Western Kentucky. As we're approaching the holidays, and as if we didn't all appreciate our families to begin with, it's really time to take stock.
Yeah, and I think even as a small organization ourselves, a small not-for-profit, we never feel like, I find myself thinking and in the headspace of, I don't have any money, and it's, what is $3 going to do? What is $5 going to do? But it's astounding how hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people giving $5 can make all the difference. So going on and giving $3, $5, $10, it makes a huge difference. And it does generate momentum and energy to put good thoughts and faith that a collective of people can make a massive difference, no matter how small each person's contribution is. So I encourage you to not be intimidated to log on and give those $3 or $5 if you can afford it. And it takes me to the thought that my sister and I had this conversation, and I think she posted something about it, that all parents out there, for always, but definitely for this time of year. And if you have anyone under the age of 10 or 12 listening, you might pause here. I had a conversation with my sister about Santa Claus and parents, and what you anticipate Santa Claus bringing to the kids as opposed to what you might get your children, and the perceptions of children as they go back to school and say, Santa Claus got me a bike and I'm so old, a Nintendo. They wouldn't get you a Nintendo, whatever a game station is.
Yes, whatever.
Yeah. And some kids are like, oh, I got underwear and socks, right? So being really conscientious about what gifts we give as parents in terms of what Santa Claus will bring. So no kid wonders why they received significantly less, potentially. And I've never thought from that perspective because I'm not a parent. Maybe you have, Vanessa.
Oh, yes, I have. I definitely have, without a doubt. And we certainly have never been super wealthy or anything, but we've been fine. We've always had what we needed, but I've always been super careful as the kids were growing up about that what I know Santa's going to be bringing them. And so I'm super careful about that. And as they got older, we don't do PS4s and things. It's about experiences. So I typically, would rather give the kids something that involves an experience and a memory that we create rather than something
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. Thank goodness Santa Claus really communicates well with parents.
Yes.
Yeah. That's all I have to say. And
Yes.
hopefully Santa Claus can help us parents know, like, this is what I'm bringing, which are the necessities to, and then the parents get to do the fun part and buy,
Yes.
the special gift.
Yes. And speaking of special gifts, we are so thankful and grateful for our gifts this year in terms of being able to continue with our programming. It's hard to believe that it's been a full year that we have regrouped and became Voices Amplified. And, we're really going to be starting off the new year with some new and interesting programs and trying to return back to some of the programming that we have done in the past and continuing to amplify voices. And we are so grateful for our supporters. We have so many supporters all over the country and who support us with just simply their attention and support us with their love and support us by playing with us and working with us, but also financial support. So we would be remiss if we didn't say a big happy holidays and thank you specifically to our Arts Match grant. And that's LG&E and KU have contributed to that Arts Match grant. So we're super thankful for them. If you go onto our website, you will see a full list of all of our incredible donors, and we will be recognizing those folks and thanking them on social media over the next week or so. And last but certainly not least, we want to thank the Kentucky Foundation for Women. They have always been supportive of our work, but they brought us and help us to find our final guest of the year and our second guest of season 2. And her name is Scout Larken. And let me tell you, we loved that time. And I'm so excited that we get to finally release that podcast.
And we reached out to Scout, not knowing her at all, on a recommendation of Kentucky Foundation for Women. And like Vanessa said, and she blew us away. And like a lot of our guests, often people are like, well, what do I have to say on a podcast? Why am I important? And then we're in the middle of talking to them going, good gracious, you're amazing.
Yeah.
And one of these things that Scout did is we were trying to get to know her and say, like, we would love to have you on the podcast. We just like to amplify the voices of artists in Kentucky. No pressure, of course, but just send us a little bit of an idea of who you are. And she sent us an artist statement that we thought, and you'll hear us talk about it in the as soon as we wrap up here. But she sent us an artist statement that we thought was clearly she had been working on something, like it's been working on it for a long time, putting these thoughts together. And she's like, oh no, I just sat down and wrote that for you all to give you a sense of who I was. Like she had done it in a short amount of time. She is a writer. You will hear her read from her book, which you can order. you are listening to us get to know this human being. And it's clear that right off the bat, we all have great admiration for each other. But for all those folks out there who love stories like Vanessa and I do, and us theater folks and storytellers do, we wanted to share some of her artist statement. We are skipping huge chunks of it. And I'm hoping we'll post it on our website for people to click and read if they're interested. But we would like to read you how this brilliant woman writer thinks. And then we will move into our podcast. So here is Scout Larken's art activist statement. Says Scout, I embody the merging of dichotomies. Collaborator and loner, learned and intuitive, practical and a dreamer, educator and respecter of folkways, entrepreneur and work-averse, politics enthusiast and artist, rural and urban, a musician who can't dance, seriously funny. Yet, ironically or not, I testify that binary thinking has never worked for me. My literary and performance experiences, professional endeavors, and cultural political activity weave together 4 strands that are integral in my life and work: communication, education, activism, and the arts. Hopefully you can see why she's a great match for us. As a result of both nature and nurture, I seem to have landed squarely among the blessed who were given an organic ability to recognize connections, both obvious and obscure, between and among all things. Finding ways to use connections creatively is the most fascinating and rewarding work I do, especially when the result delightfully or powerfully brings together otherwise discrete ideas, objects, events, places, or people. Whatever illuminates is of value to me. In addition, I believe deeply that an action anywhere, no matter how small, affects all of us everywhere. For as the Native American saying goes, when one strand is plucked, the whole web vibrates.
She continues, to all younger folks who bravely and visibly act on your sincere compassion about this world and about the condition of all its people, the torch is now yours. Don't let it go out. To those now doing the hard work to improve and equalize the life experience on our shared planet, carry on mightily. To those who envision and create and share toward better living, keep that up. To those who reflect deeply on ideas for the greater good in ways that I relate to and endorse, I fucking love you. You each and all have my enthusiastic support and energy. I'm consistently amazed at what you think of next. I implore you all, my coming generations of give-a-shitters, trust your instinct, embrace your intuition, and most important, develop your intellect. Those 3 I words will serve you well. Move that starting line forward for those who will follow you. Use your skills, your tools, your language, your arts. Follow through on your commitments. I wish those progressive thinkers and fearless actors among you the very best successes as you go through your own generation's political, cultural journey, even to the time when you pass on that torch, still gloriously lit. I believe in you.
Skip, skip, skip. And we get to the closing statement. Witness. A great shock occurs when fiction becomes nonfiction. Nonetheless, it is here. It's arrived. We're in it. So we've got to focus, got to face our new realities. We must be vocal, active, and courageous in the face of the disturbing dystopia that is now clearly unfolding in plain sight, confronting us whether we want it to or not. So I urge you to take nothing for granted. Be vigilant. Watch out for propaganda and censorship. Numerous shifts, even incremental ones, in language and policy will add up faster than you can imagine. Do whatever you can. Do your best, always. We ignore ineffable threats and manipulative messaging and the suppression of essential truths at our own peril. So saith this tired sage. It's brilliant. And when you're reading it, you're like, this is, I was just like, this woman is writing my heart on the page.
Yeah.
She's stunning.
So incredible. Yes.
And drawing it back to what we're talking about with giving to not-for-profits, giving to this tornado relief. When one strand is plucked, the whole web vibrates. Every action makes a difference and resonates. So we are thrilled to introduce you to Scout Larken. Today, we have a special guest, Scout Larken, who was recommended to us by Kentucky Foundation for Women. And as some of you know, KFW is a major contributor to Voices Amped, Bodies Amped. They've supported all of our work with the Girl Project and Voices Amplified thus far. So Scout, I just have to ask, what is your relationship to KFW? Why did they lead us to you?
I have no idea. I do know that I've been involved with them from practically the very start.
Really?
Founded it. Yeah. I mean, maybe not the first year, but right away. And so over the years, I've had various kinds of relationships with them. You know, I've been an evaluator. I have been a grant recipient. I have done special programs for them, just different things over the years. And I'm not sure that people who don't know a lot about what goes on in the rest of the country can understand how lucky women in Kentucky are to have this foundation. I mean, we're one of the few that really, does it. And to be in a largely rural state, I just think that's amazing.
Yeah, I totally agree. The organization is amazing. Even living in different states myself, I've looked for organizations similar to that in the places I've been. Nothing.
That's right. And
Yeah.
I've known them. I've been through at least 4, if not, I guess at least 4 directors, so, there's been a lot of turnover over the years, but normally people stay there quite a long time and then they go on to do their next thing. And so that's how long I've been hanging around with people from KFW.
Nice. So just like you, our listeners, this is our very first time talking to Scout. We've emailed back and forth. But in the emails with you, Scout, I've been quite frankly mesmerized by your writing. Vanessa texted me and was like, I want to hang her artist statement on my wall. And like a lot of artists that we have in our lives, you seem to have done everything under the sun plus some more. So I just have to say a few things about you for our listeners. I'm just going to read your bio and embarrass you a little bit just because I want them to know what I'm talking about here. So Scout, who we're all meeting today, is a multi-genre creative type amateur political analyst and shade tree philosopher who has embraced hermitage and retirement by reverting to rural life as a quasi-hermit on a remote farmlet at the end of the road in Kentucky's largest city. She's a writer of songs, plays, articles, and books, an editor, designer, publisher, director, actor, dramaturg, producer, a lifelong musician, an educator, a journalist, a researcher, an entrepreneur, and a progressive activist. Her career has been a busy intersection of communication, education, activism, and the arts. She's lived in urban and rural settings on the East and West Coast, traveled far and wide, worked in radio, dabbled in video and film, and designed, presented seminars, workshops, informational materials, community cultural organizers, artists, students, educators, and other professionals are who she has worked with. She's a native of West Kentucky's flat farmlands with a stint in California, and later was a transplant into the great nation of Appalachia before becoming a citizen of Louisville. Nonetheless, she says writing, music, politics, and theater are still in her mix, even during retirement. And she's always an avid voter and committed feminist. And she's not shy at all about having a country accent and deep rural roots. I decided at 42 after I left grad school, and I still have my regionalisms. I'm like, fuck it. They're built in. They're there for good. So I find it fascinating growing up in the arts that people like you exist really close to where I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky. And Vanessa and I have been doing our work together for 12 years. And Kentucky Foundation for Women told me about you, and I didn't know about you. I feel like all artists know each other in this tiny, tiny world, particularly in Kentucky. So, as an artist, you've worn a lot of hats, obviously. What's your meat and potatoes? Like, what's your main thing that you do in the arts?
Honestly, I can't say there's a main thing. I will say that probably theater, music, and literary arts are my three, the biggest ones. I mean, I've never really done anything with dance. And I don't do anything with visual arts. I mean, sometimes I've done some interesting things with visual artists in collaboration. You know what I mean? So, and I worked for a ceramicist one time for a little while when I lived in Carolina. But yeah, but I'm not a visual artist. Now I do some photography, but that's not anything that I've ever pursued in any sort of a very public way, other than when I was a journalist and I worked in the newspaper business.
And you worked in the newspaper business. Very cool. So you are a theater person predominantly, we might say.
Theater person and a literary person, a writer. And I was a publisher for a while, and I'm now working for a different publishing company since I retired and mine closed. But I've been a musician for well over a half a century. I mean, I started playing when I was a kid.
What do you play?
And my primary instrument is guitar.
Nice.
I can play almost anything that has strings, but doesn't have to be bowed, because I don't have the wrist and the elbow for the bow. I just, I've fooled around with fiddles and cellos and things, but I mean, mostly it's stuff like guitar and, those kinds of instruments. So
yeah,
a little banjo, a little mandolin, just enough to get in trouble.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
So what theaters have you worked with in the Louisville area or in Kentucky, and what kind of work have you done with them?
Oh, theater. Let's see. I'm trying to go back first. See, here's the thing. You all being younger and really, building your careers. Anytime, I think I'm your first boomer, right? You had any other people who are retired or whatever? This is why I have
Not yet.
Yeah, right. So I'm your first. Oh,
You are first.
But that's the thing, is when you've lived a long time, you've done a lot of different things, and some of that stuff that you listed have actually sort of crossed over a lot, because I'm real big on collaboration.
Right.
I love that. But let's see. I did community theater when I lived out in. See, I grew up on the West Coast of Kentucky, so that means out there on the Mississippi River.
Yep.
Right. If you know geography of Kentucky, so it's near Paducah. It's actually past Paducah from here, but anyway. And so I did some community theater out there at the Market House. I did a few shows. We did the International Quilt Festival comes to Paducah every year, and we did the show Quilters for a couple of seasons for them, and they loved it. Of course, they've seen it everywhere they go. They love the show, and I love doing it. It was a wonderful ensemble piece. And then then I've toured some shows before, including some that I wrote and helped co-produce. I had a little production company for a while with somebody. And but in Louisville, I would say, of course, I live an hour south of Louisville now, literally at the end of the road, but I still work with them a lot. I commute back and forth some. And I've worked with Pandora Productions, which is the city's LGBTQ plus, theater company. That's the only kind of shows they do is stuff around those issues. Wonderful, wonderful company, Pandora. And Eve Theater is another one.
Yeah, we're familiar with them.
And so I'm getting ready to direct that Gloria Steinem centered piece called Gloria Alive.
Oh.
And for Eve. Yeah. And
nice.
So we're looking forward to that, because I mean, for some of us of a certain age, We actually lived through all that, all those times. Second wave feminism cranked up when I was a teenager.
Mm.
So my whole life has been, that's how come I'm a lifelong feminist, is because I saw it from the, start in the late 60s and around 1970, I think. And so this cast is going to be, it's going to be a multicultural cast, and it's going to be, we're going to be talking not only about Gloria Steinem and, her being sort of the hub of this particular play, because it's based on I guess you'd call it an autobiography and not just a memoir. But anyway, that's book that she wrote. But we've also got all the biggies, we've got, we've got Flo, and we've got Dorothy, and we talked about Shirley Chisholm, and we got Abzug, and these are the names that I grew up hearing anyway. And so that's it, we were going to do that show. And we did the Pussy Grabber plays, and I directed a couple of pieces in it a couple of years ago. That's the one that was based on all the women who have accused the Orange Menace of his indiscretions. And so we did that show, and people loved it. We sold it out every single time.
Right.
Yeah. So we think we're hoping that this is going to happen with the Gloria show too. But anyway, that'll be at the Mix at the Kentucky Center this fall, unless we're back in lockdown. I mean, we don't know.
When is that? It's in the fall
I
sometime?
think it opens October 1st.
Okay, great.
And of course, we're talking in 2021. So if we're in rehearsals, we're just starting rehearsals now in August. So we should be ready by the first. And if we don't, then we'll tape it and make it available online.
So when you were young, following Gloria Steinem, looking at this second wave of feminism, where in Kentucky were you?
You were out west.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you were past Paducah.
Yeah, I was out. There are only 4 counties in Kentucky that are on the Mississippi River, and it's one of them. And it's one of the 5 smallest counties in population in the whole state. So it's a tiny little place. There's no town you would recognize if I said the name.
But was it strange to be in this tiny county and watching this second wave of feminism, and were a lot of people where you were having these conversations? Or
not a lot of people, only some people at the beginning. And you know how propaganda is. Everybody was hearing about the bra burners and the man haters and all that bullshit. But interestingly, the way it sort of came into my consciousness is that a cousin of my mother's, who was living in California, came to visit. She and some members of the family came to visit, and she sort of pulled me aside because she saw that I was of an age where I could, should be starting to relate to this stuff. And she pulled me aside and she said, I wonder what is going on. Like, do you hear about feminism? The women's movement is what we were calling it. And are there very many people around here? How do people around here feel about it? Blah, blah, blah. And so that sort of plan, I had that little conversation with her. And of course, I didn't have much to contribute because she was bringing me the news,
Yeah.
And but from then on, I started paying attention, and I, there were a few people that we would talk about it. But as with any place where you've got a lot of low country churches, and a lot of, misinformation floating around and stuff about right and wrong and this and that, it wasn't a very progressive place at all. So I was ready to leave when I could.
So what's your personal history with books, stories, and publishing?
Oh man, I wish I had that picture in here. I'm a 3rd generation editor and publisher. My family, my grandfather, okay, we're going back now. Remember, I'm not that far removed in terms of generations from Victorians. In other words, I'm telling you that my grandparents, my mother's mother and dad in particular, were born before the end of the 19th century. They were born in the 1890s. Okay. That's my own grandparents. And you know how you pick up things from your grandparents and how close you can be to them. And some people are. So a lot of the ideas that they were raised with and that they then passed on were those old sort of very, suppressive kinds of ideas and that. But my grandfather, as a teenager, went to work for a fellow who owned the local county weekly newspaper. And before, some years went by, this and that, he sort of apprenticed with him and all, and he ended up owning it when that old guy retired. So that's when we got into the newspaper business. And then of course, my mother worked there. She ran the linotype. This is in the days of hot type. You all don't even know what I'm talking about, probably. But but I've got a picture of my grandfather sitting at the linotype. The year he retired, they ran a big, piece about him in the regional paper down there, not one of our papers. And so anyway, then after that, everybody in the family worked there a little bit, I think, as they were growing up or whatever. Like I say, my mom did. And then my uncle took it over, and he owned it for a while, and he made it into a little chain. So we had a little chain of county weekly newspapers out there. And then he asked me if I wanted to take over as editor. And I mean, I didn't buy anything, but I did work for those papers, So that was actually, I started working there in circulation when I was, younger than that. But anyway, it was always important to me. And the thing that's really cool about this is that at the time, and this would have been in the 70s sometime, I don't know whenever I took it over, as editor, we were running 2, maybe still 3, but certainly 2 papers for sure down there with a crew, because he had gone to Frankfurt. He worked in state government at that point, and that's why he asked me to come in and do that work. With 7 women. There were 7 women, and one of them, who had been the editor before she moved on, she told me that she had looked it up. We didn't have internet, so I don't know how she looked it up, but she did some research and found out that that was the only place in the country where multiple papers owned by one entity were run completely by women.
Wow.
Just really cool. So, and I noticed all this, I said 70s, so we're still in the part, second wave in the beginning of all that, and coming, trying to watch that grow and so forth. So, and as I say, my uncle, who had been the editor before me, he always said, "I'm not a politician, I'm a statesman." And he made a very clear distinction between that. He felt like his role was public service, not, campaigning and being a politician. So he always would say that. And so we've always also been almost hysterically involved with politics. You know what I mean? Like, it's always been incredibly important to us. So that's where I get that piece. And then just stories and books and things. The other side of my family, they were school teachers. My grandparents on my dad's side, and my mother and dad were teachers, and all of dad's siblings were. And then some of us in my generation were. So from the time I was tiny, that was being read to, and then I was reading, and it just goes from there, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I love for it.
And I will say this: both sides of my family were good storytellers, but my mother's in particular, they were hilarious, wonderful, and like just mesmerizing storytellers. And I told my mother recently, I said, she's like, "How do you remember all this?" Because I was telling her one of those mammal stories or something. She said, "How do you remember this? I don't even remember this." And I said, "Well, I think it's just the way I'm wired, number one." Number 2, when all my cousins were out catching lightning bugs in the yard, I was hiding up underneath this dining room table listening to you all tell.
Oh man, that's so cute. So yeah, you obviously are someone who follows politics. Interesting that you're talking about a newspaper. And we obviously are aware that Kentucky is a very conservative state. We might not ever get our way and take it. But I think it's interesting. And as I've gotten older, really not being able to separate politics from art, because politics by definition is people living in a group making decisions, right? And it's everything we're negotiating, even if it's like the politics of a family or the politics of a relationship, or so And that kind of comes full circle into arts activism work. So I'm just interested in, it sounds to me, it would appear from your stories that your family was liberal and you were growing up in a conservative place with a liberal family, and you're running the newspaper, or a newspaper.
Right. And the other piece of it is that while I'm not religious at all now, I was raised in the Methodist church. And the Methodist church is quite different from some of the other Protestant denominations. And I will say that I think our little church was probably the most liberal church in that county. And it wasn't like activism liberal, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But the way I always explain it is, well, it's kind of like Hillary Clinton, who grew up a Methodist. Well, it's all about service. And that, she talked about that a lot when she was campaigning a few years ago. That's what we learned. That's what I learned. And also it's more New Testament than Old. You know what I mean? It's about love. It's about the real words from the guy who the whole damn religion is named after, Christ. And it's not so much of that Old Testament fire and brimstone stuff.
Yeah, I belong to a Methodist church too, in my Columbus life.
Yeah.
And I felt comfortable with it for those reasons you're talking about, for sure.
Yeah, more singing, less judgment, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So I feel really lucky in that way. And also, my mother in particular, my parents, they were educated people, and that put us in a sort of a minority in a place, like that. And not that it makes any difference, but I'm just saying, I think that I know for sure when we were going through the civil rights movement in the 60s, and I was a kid, I was very upset with what we were seeing on the little black and white TV screens. I mean, we didn't even have color TV back then. I'm old, y'all.
You have a young spirit.
I'm going to tell you my linotype story if you don't watch out. But anyway, we saw the fire hoses and the dogs and all that Bull Connor crap that was going on down in Alabama and down in there, and all the stuff in Mississippi. And I would say, why are they? I didn't understand it because I'd never been around anything like that, really. And my mother was really good at trying to help me understand it. I mean, she didn't really understand it either. Nobody with any common sense can look at anything like that and understand it. But she tried to help me contextualize it, I guess. That was very helpful to me. And then also, put me on a track of, fairness is really important to me, and justice is really important to me, and civil rights are really important to me. And that all came because I lived through, what we went through was sort of like what kids today are going through with all the different issues. That it's just too much. Like our war was Vietnam, and then now you've got this stuff that we're trying to get out of in Afghanistan. I mean, there was just a lot, and all the civil rights stuff, and the women's movement, and now you've got Me Too and Time's Up and all those things. I mean, it's a lot of it's the same. The pandemic is different. But other than that, I mean, of course, I lived through the AIDS pandemic in the 80s, I guess. So, but I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm to the age now where sometimes I reflect on that, and mostly I do it so that I can know, sort of. Some people will say, if you don't know where you've come from, then you won't know where you're going.
Yeah.
And so all I'm trying to figure out right now is, where am I right now? Which is hard. It's really hard because I've aged out of a lot of the stuff I used to do. I used to be a touring musician, and I, was making records and things, but I've aged out of all that. So it's about finding your place, accepting the fact that you're I'm talking about myself and a lot of people my age, although they won't admit it, that, you become irrelevant, sort of socially, but you don't become completely useless. Because there's still, as I said in something I sent you, we are now the keepers of that knowledge. We're the archive. And so when people your age and younger need to know something or need some perspective or whatever, I would hope you would think you could come to us,
Yeah, irrelevant. That's such an interesting word. I feel like I'm so the older, I mean, maybe the older I get, the more relevant the people who are older than me in my life become. I grew up with my mom in theater, so I was around adults all the time. I wasn't around kids as much. And I still feel that draw to, the generation older than me, but I'm not going to agree with irrelevant, but you can say it. As we talk about the stereotypes of our accents, our regionalisms, where we've come from, and you talked about like intelligence, I guess, being a secret weapon, as someone who I grew up Southern Baptist. I went and saw plays at my church where there were holes in the floor and they were pulling people down into hell. Like, these are shows I was seeing. So, but this was with my grandparents and my grandmother. Just thinking, as you're saying these words, was of service to everyone in her community, delivering food, after church to anyone who needed it. Like, definitely all about service. So when you talk about the stereotypes of Kentucky, I assume you've experienced those firsthand, like people making an assumption because of the way you sound or where you're from, that we are less intelligent, perhaps.
All the time. And I used to worry about it. Of course, when I worked in radio, I had a radio voice, but I didn't like doing that. And when I no longer had to, try to do that, I just stopped because here's the thing. People who have intellect that is developed, and who are constantly, that's the thing. I might be irrelevant as a leader of a social justice movement right now, but I'm still developing my understanding of things in my mind and so forth. I think that when people hear someone with what most people call a country accent, like I have, the first thing they do is they hear that sound and it sort of might hit them wrong. But the great thing is, and I actually learned this from someone else who sort of talks like me, but she's not with us anymore, but she was, brilliant. When you get past that, or when you get to start to listen to the content of the conversation or the message, whatever it is, and suddenly you're going, oh my God, that's smart. How can this person sound so dumb, be so smart? It's kind of like a way to teach people that they need to stop judging in that, in these superficial ways. So I just go ahead and, talk my rural talk and, say as many smart things as I can come up with.
Say as many have your smart phrases. So I loved reading you talking about generational divergences and intergenerational confluences. Does that to some degree mean that you have a love of working with young people or intergenerational? Do you see that a lot in your work in the arts, or is this more in your activism or politics?
Of course, that existed in a big way for me when I was a teacher, which I was I think I taught, well, I don't know. I guess if you throw in the private school and the college and a few other things that I did, maybe about 20 years, but I taught in public schools for about 16 years. And of course that, all that was there then. I think a lot, and some of the activism I've done has been with young people as well. Yes, definitely. And some of the other kinds of arts things have been. But probably the most youth intensive piece of it was when I was teaching, and when I was teaching at Governor's School for the Arts too, of course. And I was there from 89, I was there 89, 90, and 91, I think. And my teaching partner there for the writers was the brilliant Ann Shelby. You all should talk to her someday. She was introduced once as the most articulate woman in Kentucky, which embarrassed the hell out of her, but we've never let her forget it. I still call her. But she is. But she's got it, she talks like I do, but she's from Eastern Kentucky. And one thing I learned working in the mountains and also living there and also out where I grew up, it's all the same people. And if you look at the geography, the Tennessee River and the Cumberland River, they start in the mountains and then they dip down into Tennessee and then they come back up out there. That area around Paducah out there where I grew up is called the Four Rivers region because because you've got the Tennessee River that makes Kentucky Lake, and then you've got the Cumberland River, which makes Barkley Lake, and then you've got the Ohio coming, from Louisville on down to there, and then you've got the Mississippi, and the confluence is right there at Cairo, Illinois. And our family farm where my mom lives is 10 miles from there. So that's another thing is that I said rivers. I think I mentioned to you at some point that rivers are important to me. Well, gosh, I grew up, partying in the river bottoms and, hearing stories about the river and knowing people who died working on rivers, fell between the barges, all kinds of things. I mean, that's just a part of the culture that I understand. And so when I lived in Louisville, which I don't anymore, I recognized a lot of the old pieces of Louisville culture that were still there because it's a river city. And when I lived and taught in Paducah, it was, it's a river city, and a lot of things, even for people now who aren't involved with the river really anymore, it's part of their work or whatever. They don't even understand that some of what they do, sort of by tradition or whatever, really goes back to those historic days. I'm a history buff, and I just try to, that web spinner thing, I can't help it. I just connect everything. So.
Yeah. And you love philosophy. Who do you love to read?
I gotta say, old Epicurus really kind of does it for me. And people don't really, they think that Epicurean has become this word around gourmet food, and that's only just a little teeny, that came from the idea of, but I gotta say I did. And I like the Greeks, all the Greeks better than I like any of the Roman philosophers or all that stuff. Because, the Romans stole it from the Greeks to start with.
Do you consider yourself a philosopher?
Yeah. Like I always say, I'm a shade tree philosopher. I don't have any credentials whatsoever, but I've done a lot of thinking and writing and figured out, some things that I think are really important. I'll tell you this. I know that in the past, you all have asked different people that you've interviewed, what's the best piece of advice you ever got? And I'm right here. It kind of fits for me to say that uncle that I was telling you about, who was the newspaper man and statesman, he gave me the best piece of advice I'd ever heard, which is start small, show growth. And I don't think he made it up, but that's the first time I'd ever heard it. And I was asking him for advice because I was taking over a project that I needed, his experience advice with. And that's one of the things he said. And I've never forgotten that. And I thought about it a lot. I'm like, what does that mean? Well, it means if you just start small, then it's manageable and you're figuring out all the bugs. And as you show growth, you look like a damn genius. Of course, if you start too big and fall on your face, then you look like a fool. So start small, show growth. And I've applied it in many ways in my life, not just in work I was doing, just in many ways. And it has never failed me. So that's. But so when I talk about being a shade tree philosopher, it's things like that. And then, how does that connect with another idea? And what does it mean to be this, that, or the other, or whatever? And so the human condition is just fascinating to me. I don't know what to do about it, but.
Oh man, and sometimes you got to step away. I know, but it's fascinating. We've referenced your artist statement a few times. It's a 2-page statement. I've highlighted all the way through it, but I was floored by this statement. I'm interested in knowing what you wrote it for, who you wrote it for. Did you write it for yourself?
I wrote it for you, and I wrote it for myself, and I wrote it because I think I've got the germ of a project in my head that involves a series of essays that I think I can make come together, but I'm not ready to talk about it yet because I don't know exactly what it is. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Very early thinking stages of a thing. And so I was just going to write you a little something that would give you some background, and it ended up being that. And I liked it, so I sent it to you. But I mean, I know I'm going to use that again.
I assumed you had this for a decade.
Me too.
But that stuff about the web and, it's never the same river twice and all that. I mean, I'm also a collector of quotes when they strike an essential note in me. And that's where some of my philosophies have come from, and, things about living deliberately and not just sort of being passive and things like that. I mean, and I've done some writing around, my philosophies, but I'm not claiming that I've come up with all this as original ideas, because these are things that apply to the human condition and have been around, for as long as we've had writing, I guess. I mean, I don't know, probably even longer than that. I'm sure the Aborigines in Australia were, telling each other these stories and that kind of thing. So, but what I am saying is I try to find a way to articulate something, and especially if I can hook it up with 2 or 3 other things, and then I can make it a new way to look. It's kind of like that old model, thesis, antithesis, and out of that you get synthesis.
Yeah.
It's like that. It's like I'm the synthesis, and because I've been reading and studying film and listening to stories and everything all my life, and because I had to teach a lot of literature and history and different things, these connections are just automatically made. I don't know, like I said, it's how my brain's wired. It's just I can hear one thing that sounds nothing like another thing, and I can figure out how they're connected.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not bragging about that. I'm saying it's weird. It's like a blessing and a curse.
Yes.
Because sometimes it drives me crazy.
Yeah.
And I don't even want, I don't want to deal with it. I don't have time. But that's how my brain clicks.
Yeah. Something you said in here, one generation plants the tree, the next generation gets the shade, something it's just stunning. And another quote from in here, you're part of a generational process. Process is always more energizing than product. Like, you're so deeply an artist, and you're writing I would say all ideas that I know have come from somewhere, but just reading the way you've composed these thoughts was so moving to me.
Very much.
You wrote it for us.
I know.
What can I jump to Campfire and have you read something?
Sure.
You're reading something from your book Slant, is that true? So our listeners know Campfire. It's a moment where we ask our guests to share their work with us or the work of someone else who's inspiring them. We ask Scout to share some of her writing with you, our listeners. So take it away. Give us what you.
Before I do that, can I just say this? That the novel is called Slant, but you'll notice that I write under the name Scout Link. So if you go look it up, you won't see Larken, you'll see Link. So I'll read to you then. Don't you love it? I mean, this is one thing I learned as a teacher, is that even big kids and adults like to be read to.
I love it.
I mean, people think you don't read out loud because you only do that to kids, but that's crazy. I love to be read to.
Yes.
So, here we go. So I just picked one that's not too long, and I'll just try to set it up since it's a novel. This is the voice of the narrator of the story, the bard, who is sort of telling this story. Now, this is set in rural Kentucky, and it's set in a little intentional community that's very, progressive, liberal, sort of like, it was founded by old hippies in the 60s, and it's all fictional, obviously, but really is anything. I mean, So this is the voice. We have various voices. I have various voices going in here, but this is the voice of the narrator, who's called the Bard. And this chapter is called Meditate Towards Solutions. I need to hit the cushion bad. That's because what I have to be before this telling is securely centered, fully focused. Maybe if I meditate, empty my mind, I'll be ready to channel this story as it wants to be told and keep myself mostly out of its way. I intend to try. They don't call me the Bard for nothing. And on behalf of every last slanter, this account will require my best effort. Here's the deal. I hold an interesting position in this community, for I am Slant's keeper of stories. You heard that right. I've mercifully been allowed to live a life perfectly suited to my talents. I tell stories. I write poems. I recite poems. Some I've told to one person at a time, or two, or a porch full. Some I've told to the whole of Slant all at once. It's who I've been, who I am. No matter where I go or what I do, it's who I'll always be. I'm one of those curious types who observe and make meaning. One of those who uncover obscure lessons and simplify the complexities of human living, or complicate the simplicities. I'm a universal citizen landed in a place that has uniquely valued wordsmiths so much that they honored one, me, with a magical title, Resident Bard. I write, I tell, but I listen too. That's because one of my jobs is to chronicle all things Slant. It's an interesting function, archiving Slant's collective memory. You might say I'm a journalist without a news outlet, an editor that never goes to press. Nonetheless, I have filled pages, spoken volumes, heard epics. The narratives I collect and interpret are both instructive and entertaining. At least I hope so, for those have always been my aims. The fact that Slant, from its genesis, insisted on having a resident bard tells you much more about the whole of us than it does about the individual me. But I digress. And if I know me, there'll be plenty of digressions, side roads, and tangents. Like Fidelity Creek, this story meanders as it likes. Your best approach? Relax. Give yourself permission to enjoy the flow. Open your internal viewfinder. Broaden your assumptions. Don't shy from brutal truth. If I know anything at all, I know it's not easy to tell other people's stories, far less easy than telling your own, particularly if you're committed to doing a story justice. And telling can be a dangerous undertaking, but I'm here to try because I have faith in the storytelling process, including the gathering, including the telling, including the listening, including the thinking going on within both teller and listener, and most valuable, their collaboration in this process. Now, I vow that I'll pull no punches. I'll give you everything as honestly as I can. I don't know any other way to do it. Here's what I propose in case you care to know. I'm going to tell you one big story about two small places, noticeably different from one another in purpose and design, though geographically they probably aren't a couple miles apart as the crow flies. And I'm going to use myriad little stories to get that done. Lots of small stories, because every single person, alive or dead, is a story, is in fact a series of stories going forward and back. And places are stories too. You'll see. This one, to be clear, is a story that mostly has already happened in all of its parts and pieces. It's not the last or only story of this place, but it's a significant slice of a continuum that documents our living here. Like all humans, we've known struggles and we've known joys, both individually and collectively. We've questioned, we've discovered enlightenment, we've uncovered truths and lies and values and meaning. In other words, we've lived. Looking back on it all, I find this fascinating, revealing. A study in community, politics, religion, culture, conflict, passion. Here's hoping you too find worth in our stories. We're walking this world together after all. Might as well learn some useful lessons, dive into some productive thinking along the way. What I'm saying is, if we're not about making meaning out of the randomness of chaos, then what's the point? As a matter of principle and accuracy, it's important that many voices contribute to this telling, and so will we. A writer, regardless of what you've been told, is not an island, but one person does not a community make. Mine is a function and artistic role in the life of my tribe, Slant. I attempt to coalesce the many stories of these people in this place, e pluribus unum, and all that jive. So, there's top-notch Annie and Alec and Horace, who mused as loners. Nooner and Nettie and Joy conversed and theorized as neighbors. The Jimmies dreamed as peers. The artists Junie and Willie and Gazelle and Tractor Girl and I, well, we communicate through our respective art forms. Mayor Sheepwater has always spoken softly, listened well, and mediated brilliantly from deep within his hyper simple intuition. The Billings boys use few words, but their work creates the practical art of function and comfort for us all. Jorge builds things. Dick collects things. Will McCarl's family provide supplies to meet our needs. These are but a few of us. So many voices. And not just here in Slant. There are significant uphill voices too, from the place called the Rising Sun. And there are even a few downhill voices in this gumbo. My work, concisely put, is anchored in assembling voices, all these and more. And it's centered right there in your brain too, as you receive these voices. You're the interpreter who matters most. Because if a story doesn't work for you, the reader, the listener, then perhaps it doesn't work at all. Notice that you're hearing me make no promises about chronology. And here's some free advice if you want it. If you're assuming a chronological narrative that's more about what happens in what order than it's about fully who it happened to, then you might consider suspending any plot-driven expectations you may be unintentionally harboring. Up to you, though. The story unspools. The bard will abide. Now, what you're wondering is how I came to know these particular tales and histories and moments and conversations and events. Did I get my information firsthand, or did I pick it up farther from the tree? Are these stories real, or did I imagine them? Am I a believer in myth, or a believer in truth, or a believer in nothing? Will I stay neutral or take sides? Do I believe we have greater responsibility to each other or to ourselves? The answer to everything you ask is yes.
Okay, so that's Slant.
Yeah.
And your pin is Scout Link if someone were searching for Slant. And what's the inspiration for the story that you wrote?
I some years ago I was teaching out. This is set in what we call the Western Knobs, and there's a lot in here that explains a lot about the place. But you just in short, the Knobs is a big semicircle. Well, it circles the bluegrass region in Kentucky. And so if you start at Muldraw Hill out west of Louisville and go down through like E-Town, if you're driving out on the West Kentucky Parkway and you notice those funny hills start popping up there, and then you go right through them and then you're in flats, that's the western part of the knob. So I was teaching in a county out in that region, I'll just say, and I took a drive up one of the knobs that was there, and I found this. I saw this strange place, and it was an old camp meeting ground for a church group, some kind of religious fundamentalist group or whatever. And then when I lived out in Virginia in the mountains, there was a little church called Slant Church, and I always thought that was the funniest thing because it was set on the side of a hill. It was built, like that. I now live in the Western Knobs somewhat, and my house lives on it's one of those stilt houses like it. So so I always thought someday I'm going to use that name Slant. But I just got to dreaming about a place where like-minded people might find themselves, creating community, because building community is some of the activism work I had learned to do down at the Highlander Center in East Tennessee, and even when I worked out at the Apple Shop a little bit in Eastern Kentucky. But so I just created, that. But I will admit that some of the backstories on some of these folks come from like my family stories too. Some of them, not all of them. And then I had to have a conflict, so I had to put that church camp up the hill and a creek running, down between them, and so then here's this conflict, that comes along, and then of course it ends up with a politician getting all messy in the mix, and so it's all my stuff, but it's fiction, but you know how one thing will remind you of something else, or I hope you know how I hope you know that. I think you're that kind of thinker, you both of you. And that's sort of like how this came about. I worked on it for a long time, but that's because I was getting other people's book and books, published instead of working on my own.
Yeah.
And then once I stopped, doing that work, then I was able to finish mine.
You said you were going to recommend some other books that you've.
Oh yeah. Well, I was just thinking. I know sometimes you ask that.
We do. We love to ask, what are you reading? What should we be reading?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure I'm probably behind everybody on this, but this is Cast by Isabel Wilkerson. This book is an instant classic as far as I'm concerned. I mean, this is something that we need to all need to read if we care about, what's going on with classism and racism and everything in our culture. This is a book that changed me in ways of it made me more of a, probably part of what led me to activism, and it's just a classic. To Kill a Mockingbird, Harper Lee, and actually that's where my name Scout comes from. I should also mention that a lot of people who may see this or hear it and hear me talk about, the Sally Bingham Award or KFW or something about teaching or whatever. I went by Kate for a long time, so some people would recognize that name. So I'll just say that. I always keep this close at hand: the Constitution of the United States.
Yep.
And you can get a little pocket-size, thing like this. I've got a couple of these, and I just, whenever something comes up and I'm hearing them talk about it's unconstitutional or this or that, I like to look it up and see if they're right or not.
Wow.
That's amazing.
And this one right here is called On Tyranny, and it's by Timothy Snyder, and it's the one that we all need to be reading right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's about it's very short. I mean, you can almost read it, in the outhouse. It's see how I slip stuff like that in all the time? I have plumbing, people. I have electricity and plumbing. But this is about how dictatorships and authoritarian governments are created out of the fall of democracy.
Mm.
I just think that's Timothy Snyder. He's a professor, and that came out. That came out in, I think, 2017. But man, is it something that we all need to have on our minds. Little short chapters, tiny little, just a few pages each, that say, watch out for this. And if you see this happening, be aware, and here's, what you might be thinking about doing instead. And I just think it will put it more on the front of our minds. So, that's why I've got the Constitution and Timothy Snyder all in one stack.
Jeez. Everybody just had the little book. Vanessa, you want to take it away?
We're going to move on to just some rapid response questions.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. So
watch Lipton. I know.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. So we're going to try something new today. So I'm going to give you a few questions just for you. And then we're going to kind of do a round robin of questions with the three of us answering about just like some theater stuff. So here we go. If you could have any superpower, which would you choose?
All I can say is that I've always thought if I could do something that humans can't do, it would be to fly. I like trees a lot, and I'd like to see what's up in there.
What's your favorite sound?
Silence. Or maybe I should say quiet.
Quiet. Okay. What's your least favorite sound?
Anything on Fox News.
Yeah.
Because I don't like liars and I don't like manipulators.
I love it.
If you could have billboards on the highways of our country, what would they say?
I've heard you ask this before, and I did think about it some. There's a quote by Voltaire that I like a lot. Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities.
Oof.
What do you once said about you after you're gone?
Oh, I've always thought I want people to say that I was kind. And if they want to say anything else, then I guess I would include I was kind, I was fair, I was smart, and I gave a shit.
This is the round robin. Now, I put it in context of theater, but you have such a broad range of artistic skills. If you want to tweak it to any of our artistic mediums that you do, then absolutely please think about that. So this is for all of us, and we'll go, and Scott will go first, then Ellie, and then me.
Okay.
So what piece of theater, art, or whichever inspired you to become a working artist?
I think it has to be songwriting. It has to be some of the songwriters that I've always admired, and some of the ones that I really studied when I was learning to do that myself. So I'm just going to say in sort of a general way.
All right.
I'm going to take Scout's liberty, my mom.
Oh, I like that. What's bizarre is that it's not my favorite piece of theater, but being in it inspired me to pursue a theater career, and it playing Emily in our town, because I just think that it was a piece of theater that when I read it, I wasn't crazy about it. But then when I was in it and I explored it and delved and really, learned how to dive, it was the play that I learned how to deep dive in. That is what inspired me. What was the most complex piece of theater that you have worked on?
Oh my God, I just finished it. It's about the piece, and it's about how we had to do it and how it was cast, and how, it's called Southern Comfort. We just finished it. It just closed a couple months or two ago. And we had to do it because of the pandemic. The theater couldn't be open, so we had to do it, record it and put it out that way. But it was on complex themes. It's like a trans-oriented play. I actually had to play this guy named Robert. And we tried to cast it from among the LGBT, and sort of, because it's Pandora, they were really trying. And the music was sad that it was supposed to be country and bluegrass music, and I thought, I can do that in my sleep. And so I offered to be the music director. Well, it turns out it wasn't at all, and it was all this other stuff. But what we wanted to do anyway, because we thought it wasn't as appropriate as it could have been for that story of this rural chosen family in North Georgia and all this stuff, is that I had to go in and rearrange everything for the three instruments that we had, and put the right feeling there, and see, because it had been done off Broadway, so that's what they were thinking when they wrote it. And so anyway, that in everything that had happened through that thing, and it took us 3 years to finally get this thing done, because we had all kinds of issues. So I have to say Southern Comfort for me.
I would say probably the historical characters I've played, just with the research requirements. So Antony and Cleopatra and Marie Antoinette. Just complex for me in portraying historical, I think, like physically up on my feet, Big Love, like by Chuck Mee, was just like wild. It's really hard. And then I start thinking of all the other plays, and I'm like, they're all complex in their own ways. So anyway, I pass it to you, Vanessa.
So I'm going to say too, because as a director, producer type person, every single time we've tried to mount a girl project has been incredibly complex.
I can't believe I didn't think of that.
And then as an actor, definitely playing, doing the voice of Annie Sullivan in The Miracle Worker, and then also playing another part in The Miracle Worker where I was also signing and talking and playing Annie Sullivan at the same time. And it was very, very complex, rewarding, but complex and challenging. What work would you do over and over and over again, whether it's like a piece of theater or, music, or what just could never ever get old for you?
We're talking about in the arts, right?
In the arts. Well, now I'm intrigued.
Wait a minute.
I would have to say I'm a sucker. I'm going to go back to music for a minute for this one. I'm a sucker for a well well done narrative song.
Mhm.
And I will never ever get tired of singing, playing, listening to those.
Name one. Come on, name one of them.
Oh, well, the one that I've ode to Billy Joe, that's probably before your
Oh
time.
yeah.
A lot of those songs that, I'm just heartbroken that we've lost Nancy Griffith, about just about any of hers that are in that genre. John Prine has got some good ones.
Mm-hmm.
There are a ton of them out there, and some people are just brilliant that way.
Yeah.
They can tell the whole, they can tell the whole book in 3 minutes or 4.
So I would say, if you're asking me like what piece of, like if you said you're going to act in this the rest of your life, pick one.
Yeah.
I'm such a girl. Literally our production of Pride and Prejudice, playing Elizabeth Bennet, I would perform that every night for the rest of my life and be happy. God, I loved doing that play. I love that. I've read the book like 6 times. I just love it. Ugh.
As a director, oh gosh, I lean towards something super popular. I would be interested in continuing to try to reinvent it and recreate it. I love the script and the story of The Lion King and the use of masks and puppetry and all of that, but I would love to continue to direct it again and again so that I could do different approach it in different ways with different types of creativity.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I directed it the first time, I just straight up did like what you traditionally would think of. And so I'd love to get my hands on it again and again and again to try new things. What piece would you never do again? Ever. What's that? What'd you say, Scout? I missed it.
Southern Comfort, the one that I never had trouble with. Oh my gosh. It was worth it at the end, but I just would never want to put myself through that process again.
I know who, like, people I never work with again.
Yeah,
I'm not sure I know a play. I'm gonna have to skip. Maybe I'll think of it.
Yeah. You'll notice by all my answers, Scout, that I like musicals a lot. I'm a big musical geek, but I really hope that I never am approached to direct, choreograph, or be in Seussical the musical ever again in my life, because I've done it about 10 times. And as much as I love Dr. Seuss, if I hear one note from it, I'm like, no. So yeah, I can't do it ever again. If there were a male identifying role that you could play, what would it be?
That's a really good question.
Do you want us to come back to you?
Yeah, give me a second to think about this.
What about you?
Like I'm going to be any faster?
I know, I've had time to think about it.
Okay, go ahead then.
So I'm going to say Black Stash in Peter and the Starcatcher.
Oh, yeah.
Or any version of Captain Hook at all. Like any version of that character, I would love to play.
I think for me, it's got to be Atticus Finch.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me, I'd have to go for like the epic attempt of Hamlet or Macbeth, right?
Yes.
Like I really struggle with that desire. Well, when I think of me, I'm like, no, I don't. But that desire for power that Macbeth has, but obviously Hamlet, like that.
Yeah.
Just dive into.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Ooh, those are hard questions.
When it comes to Shakespeare, I wouldn't mind to try Crazy Old Lear.
Yeah.
Yes, I was going to say that as maybe like one of the most complex, but it wasn't. But yeah, playing Lear, man. We have to see your work, Scout. You have to tell us, like when you're doing stuff, we have to stay in contact.
I've got a play called Going Up Home that's going to be produced in 2022, and that'll be in the Kentucky Center for the Arts too.
So is your piece Going Up Home under Scout Link, or is it under Scout Larken?
I think it's Scout Larken Link.
Okay, cool.
I think that's what I need to sort of transition to, because a lot of people still don't really, well, not a lot of people, but there are some people who still don't know me as Scout. So when they hear that name, they don't think of me right away. But I think if I put my, Larken in there, they'll, I mean, a lot of people do, but it's just a thing. I've had several names in my life. I'm not too partial to any of them.
It's fascinating.
And thank you all for having me and for, putting up with a boomer in the midst of your active lives, and good luck. And I'm going to keep listening to your series. I loved it.
Thank you. Good. Thank you.
You guys are doing really, really interesting things here. I have a feeling that at some point, it's going to kind of explode, and people far and wide are going to start to really, recommend this thing around, and you may end up with who knows, you may end up with an NPR show.
With you, if you'll be on it with us.
Yeah, right.
You guys do the hard work, and I'll do the sidekick.
Sounds good.
That sounds great.
Thanks for listening. For those of you new to the podcast, we are Voices Amplified, and you are listening to Voices Amped. You can check out our work or support us by visiting voicesamplified.net. Our work generates brave and equitable spaces for storytelling by underrepresented voices in dominant culture. We support and partner with organizers, thought leaders, and arts activists across the United States. Our team is me, Ellie Clark, and co-founder Vanessa Becker-Weig, as well as the incredible Dr. Margaret McGladdery and Jenny Benavides. You can follow us on Facebook or Instagram at Voices Amped. We love feedback, so shoot us an email at ellie@voicesamplified.net. That's ELLIE@voicesamplified.net. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest, reach out. As always, thanks for your support, and remember, be curious, be courageous, take up space, and make some noise.